Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddham dhammang sanghang namasami. Dear friends, today we are going to be discussing a particular sutta from the Anguttara Nikaya called Avijja Sutta. It's in the Book of Tens, number 10.61. And if you have the hardbound copy from Wisdom Publications, you can look it up. I don't know the page number on that. And then I will be showing it on the screen, but the one that I have to show you is going to be a different translation, Bhante Sujato's translation. Let me read off one section and invite you to just listen well. Can you find the page? Which page is it?
1415, yeah.
1415. Okay. Mendicants, it is said that no first point of ignorance is evident, before which there was no ignorance, and afterwards it came to be. And yet it is evident that there is a specific condition for ignorance. I say that ignorance is fueled by something. It's not unfueled. And what is the fuel for ignorance? You should say the 5 hindrances. I say that the 5 hindrances are fueled by something. They're not unfueled. And what is the fuel for the 5 hindrances? You should say the 3 kinds of misconduct. I say that the 3 kinds of misconduct are fueled by something. They're not unfueled. And what is the fuel for the 3 kinds of misconduct? You should say lack of sense restraint. I say that lack of sense restraint is fueled by something. It's not unfueled. And what is the fuel for the lack of sense restraint? You should say lack of mindfulness and situational awareness. In Bhikkhu Bodhi's translation, that would be lack of mindfulness and clear comprehension. I say that lack of mindfulness and situational awareness is fueled by something. It's not unfueled. And what is the fuel for the lack of mindfulness and situational awareness? You should say irrational application of mind. Ayoniso manasikara. I say that irrational application of mind is fueled by something. It's not unfueled. And what is the fuel for irrational application of mind? You should say lack of faith. Or could be translated lack of confidence. I say that lack of faith is fueled by something. It's not unfueled. What is the fuel for the lack of faith? You should say listening to an untrue teaching. I say that listening to an untrue teaching is fueled by something. It's not unfueled. What is the fuel for listening to an untrue teaching? You should say associating with bad people. And then comes a metaphor. In this way, when the factor of associating with bad people is fulfilled, it fulfills the factor of listening to an untrue teaching. When the factor of listening to an untrue teaching is fulfilled, it fulfills the factor of lack of faith, irrational application of mind, lack of mindfulness and situational awareness, lack of sense restraint, the three kinds of misconduct, the five hindrances. And when the five hindrances are fulfilled, they fulfill ignorance. That's the fuel for ignorance, and that's how it's fulfilled. It's like when the rain pours down on a mountaintop and the water flows downhill to fill the hollows, crevices, and creeks. As they become full, they fill up the pools fill up the lakes fill up the streams, and the streams fill up the rivers, and as the rivers become full, they fill up the ocean. That's the fuel for the ocean. That's how it's filled up. Okay, I'm going to pause here and go back to the beginning. Okay, I'm going to give the citation from Sutta Central. This very first statement at the beginning is so profound and so important. He said, there is no first point of ignorance before which there was no ignorance, and afterwards it came to be. We know that in every faith tradition, in every religion, that there's this search for the original creation of everything. And in most of the religions, there is some kind of a mythology about the creator. And the Buddha often pointed out that this is only a mythology about the creation, not something that can be discovered through direct experience. The Buddha said that through his own direct experience, he was able to recall and look back through many thousands of lifetimes of himself, and he could not find the first cause of ignorance. And he was able to look through the many cycles of the life of different kinds of beings, how they were reborn according to their karma, and he couldn't find this first cause of ignorance. And then in another teaching, the teaching on Paticca Samuppada, it takes through this sequence of steps whereby beginning with ignorance comes to be the volitional formations, the mentality and materiality, and so on, the whole cycle of dependent origination, culminating in birth, aging, sorrow, birth, old age, sickness, and death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair. How the whole origination of dukkha is starting from this ground level point of ignorance. And so this sutta is very giving a further explanation about that ignorance in terms of it's not that you can't find the creator who created that ignorance. Then this next section, which is talking about the fuel, how ignorance is fueled, this is using the Pali word called ahara, which has the meaning of nutriment. So this is a form of causation. We see that there are several different kinds of teachings that appear in the suttas about causation. The dependent origination is probably the most famous one, showing the arising of dukkha, and then in the opposite direction, showing the pattern of cessation. With the cessation of ignorance arise the cessation of all these other factors, culminating in the cessation of dukkha. So that's one famous pattern. Another famous pattern is called the Sutta on Proximate Cause, which shows how beginning with, and sometimes it says beginning with faith, that from ignorance there can be the arising of faith, and then from faith can arise joy, from joy bliss, from bliss tranquility, and so on. And so this is a form of the gradual training, especially showing how the bhavana or the samadhi culminating in wisdom and liberation is happening on another kind of a sequence of causes. And now here, this sutta, this is yet another slightly different pattern that's giving a sequence of causes. Okay. So the fuel for ignorance is the 5 hindrances in this teaching. How important is that? I think those who studied a meditation class might have been told that the 5 hindrances can obstruct and make it difficult to settle into meditation, that they can block and prevent being able to practice that formal meditation. And in that sense, sometimes we hear this teaching that when we can overcome the hindrances, then we may be able to temporarily experience seclusion from the hindrances while we are in samadhi, or while we are in samatha meditation, while we're in the deep meditation. But this is only a temporary seclusion from the hindrances, that they're not permanently eradicated until we eradicate the 10 fetters, which is another somewhat related set of factors, which is what is blocking us from our full awakening, blocking us from enlightenment, keeping us tied down in the cycle of rebirth and preventing us from being able to come to the end of rebirth. So in that sense, when I was a beginner in meditation, I thought, well, the hindrances are not that important. It's just like mowing the grass. It's not really like that profound. But here in this teaching, when it says that ignorance is fueled by the hindrances, wow, this is making the hindrances much more significant, much more important. Avijja, or the vidya, is the avijja means ignorance without vidya. Vidya is knowledge, or sometimes synonym for panya, or wisdom. And so the hindrances block wisdom. The hindrances, these are mental qualities. Sensual desire, hatred, restlessness and remorse, sloth and torpor, and skeptical doubt. Those are mental habits. They are fueled by three kinds of misconduct, meaning misconduct of speech, misconduct of the body, misconduct of speech, and misconduct of the mind. So if I kill an insect that's annoying me, that's a kind of misconduct. And if I talk to myself or talk to somebody else about killing those insects, that's a verbal misconduct. If I am planning how to kill the insects, that's a mental misconduct. And these three kinds of misconduct are the fuel for hatred. I wouldn't be able to kill them if I was filled with kindness and compassion. Only when without kindness, without compassion, full of selfishness or full of hatred for them, would I be able to kill them. And so that's how the hindrance is fueled by the action, by the misconduct. This is fueled by the lack of sense restraint. The indriya are the six senses. The samvara is the restraint. And so if anytime I smell something tasty, I want to go and get some and eat it. Every time I see something enticing, I want to go over to Amazon and buy it. Anytime something happens that's frightening or that causes anxiety, I want to start a war. This is how the lack of restraint causes the arousing of the misconduct. Then the fuel for the failure of sense restraint is called the lack of mindfulness. Lack of mindfulness and sensual awareness. That's sati sampajanya. So sati is mindfulness. Sampajanya, Bhikkhu Sujata translates situational awareness. Bhikkhu Bodhi translated as clearer comprehension. This very much has got this sense of heedfulness. Like if you see that if I take one wrong step, I could take a wrong turn and end up someplace I really don't want to be. When I was much younger, I lived in Washington, D.C. And we used to joke sometimes the way the highways were organized, that if you took a wrong turn, you'd end up in Virginia. Or if we're in the East Bay and we don't get out of the right lane, if we're in the wrong lane, by mistake, we end up in San Francisco. So it's for that reason that we've got this thing, and of course it's much more significant than being in the wrong town. Like to say, we could fall into a pattern that is sucking us back down into the world of ignorance, into this world where we need to be born again and again. It's very close, according to what I've been reading from several different bhikkhu teachers, this other word called appamado, which means heedfulness. Mad means mad. It means like in a blackout or completely confused, completely deluded. Mad means really mad, really deluded, really carried away, really out of it. And then apamada, it's like becoming more and more like thorough. Apamada is this thorough madness of being unaware and oblivious to what's going on, to what we're doing, what the consequences are. And then the apamada is the opposite. So don't go there. So a person who's heedful is aware of the danger, and they're very careful because they're aware of the danger. They don't want to take one small step, not even a tiny small step, if they can avoid it. So that's what the situational mindfulness and situational awareness is very close to that. It's got a quality of energy also, because you're not just letting things slide, but keeping this, you could say, vigilance about it. And then the fuel for that, I think Bhikkhu Sujato is being almost cute. He calls it the irrational application of mind. So in the Pali, it's ayoniso manasikaro. Manasikara is the application of the mind. Manasi is the mind, kara is making. And then the yoni is the womb, and that's like the root, the beginning. The matrix, or the pattern where things are beginning, like the genetic design that causes the whole being to grow up according to a certain pattern. And then the opposite, seeing that deeply, is seeing the beginning, seeing how things start, where they come from. And then ayoniso is you forgot to pay attention, you forgot to look, you don't know how it happened. You wake up and you're sitting out on the sidewalk in front of the bar, and your pantyhose are badly torn, and your dress is dirty, and you've lost your jacket, and you've got not one clue how that happened. This is that's not my story, but I heard that story from an actual person. So it did happen to somebody, and this wasn't just a bum. This was an educated person who then was unable because of the blackout. She couldn't see what happened. But if we're not in a blackout, we can see, we can look back. So then if anger arises, we can look very quick, very fast, see how it arises. I read the metaphor this morning. I'm reading a lovely teaching that was given by Bhante Dhammajiva about this sutta. He compares it to if there's a pandemic going on, when they get the first patient who's terribly sick, they've got so many different symptoms and they're on death's door, and they got to do a lot of work to try to figure out what the cause is, what's like a side effect of the illness piling up, or what's the root cause of how this illness got started. And then once they start to know, and they start to put out health alerts and be watching out for the spread of this pandemic, they may be able to catch it very soon. And as we get more and more knowledge, that then the very first arising of a symptom, they may be able to catch that because they got the knowledge, and then they can see where this disease is coming from. And then eventually they may find out how that particular disease is getting spread around in the community, and be able to then take effective and intelligent preventive measures to stop the spreading of the disease. So when you have yoniso manasikara, you will be like the doctor who understands how these things spread, understand what the cause is, and is on the alert, watching out for one case. So if we're in a school system and there's one child has got head lice, they send a notice around to all the parents that please inspect your children because we want to stop it. So that's Yoniso Manasikara is when we see how these things come from, we can stop them. But this negative of not knowing, just not paying attention, not taking care, not preventing, allowing things to grow. This is called a lack of faith, is the nutriment for that. And we could even associate lack of faith with on a social level. If you imagine an immoral society, which has become, people have become skeptical and rejected their traditions, rejected their religion, and then even the respect for the Constitution or the respect for the rules or the respect for law and order has all gone down the drain, and you've got a whole community that just doesn't have that kind of respect, and then people are just out there grabbing what they can. So this is sort of how the whole cycle can be perpetuated by this lack of faith. I think I'm going to circle back to this a little bit later when we talk about the plus side, about the arising of faith. But the lack of faith comes from listening to untrue teachings. Again, like in today's world at the social level, we heard that there's not any more obligation for people to say things that are true. If it's sort of truthish, or if it seems to be true, then they can go ahead and say it. And these things that are not actually true get promulgated and spread about. And even now, I think we have artificial intelligence, which is able to come up with statements that sound true, but they're not. It's just something that seems to be like it could be something true, and something that it's just gets stated, and this whole world is lost in that sea of not knowing what to believe and not knowing what to trust. If there's not a shared idea of speaking the truth, and then on the other hand, how powerful and how effective and how healing and how actually easy to recognize it is when someone stands up and they are a truth, someone who speaks the truth. The truth, in this case, a true teaching, is called Sad Dhamma. So the Sat is something that exists. Dhamma is a word for teaching or the lessons. It's also something that can be experienced. So it can be Dhamma can be phenomena or can be a teaching. But Sad Dhamma is the true teaching. It's the teaching that is both beneficial and also which is in accord with reality. And if we believe something that's not in accord with reality, we're kind of lost, aren't we? And the root for that is called associating, translated here as bad people. Sapurisa. So Purisa means a man or a person. And Sap purisa has that meaning of that which exists, that which is true, that which is real. So if you said that somebody is a real man or a real woman or a real human, it means that they're embodying the best characteristics and potentials of what it means to be human. And a true person is also a person who is dedicated to the truth, dedicated to being straight, dedicated to being not deceptive. I'm going to pause here and ask for questions and comments about what has been said so far. And just for the sake of a memory, I'm going to share the screen so that you can just see in a sort of a short form of the list of the different factors that are given in the sutta. So here, close that, close. Associating with bad people, hearing an untrue teaching, lack of faith, ayoniso manasikara, irrational application of mind. I think there's something about a rational number. There's something about rational that he's making it to mean something deep. Lack of mindfulness and situational awareness, lack of sense restraint, 3 kinds of misconduct, 5 hindrances, culminating in ignorance. So I then welcome your comment or question about that. Please put your hands up with the signal if you would like to make a comment or in the room. Okay, Matthew, would you mind to talk to the
would you say more, please, about associating with bad persons? What is the meaning of that?
Associating with bad persons doesn't mean that out of compassion, one would not visit the prison and give counseling and care to prisoners, or go to a some kind of like be in a helping profession, or go to a self-help group or something where a lot of confused people are coming and looking for help. So those kind of associations, that's not what it is meant there. What this means is following and serving a bad person. So in particular, in choosing which teachers or guides you will respect and whose advice you will follow. If you make a bad choice and choose a bad person and follow their advice, then you'll go in a wrong direction. So when looking at that person, you would hopefully see that their ethics are good, that they have a kind of attractive appearance, not being a beauty king or a beauty queen, but having a pleasant affect, then being respected by gods and humans, being somebody who is willing to point out your shortcomings, if you have any, if you're making a mistake, that a good person is able to point them out. And they do this in a way which you can see is compassionate for you, not to hurt or harm you, but doing it to help you. And a person in whom you can tell your secrets and they won't repeat your secrets. A person who does not become egocentric or distorted if they gain fame, so that their private persona and their public persona is the same, and they're not someone who, when they were humble and small, they were good, and then when they became famous and wealthy, they came to be corrupted. So those are some of the descriptions that we read in the sutras about a bad person, or I don't know if I like bad person. It may be better to say a untrue person. But it's very close in the idea to the Kalyanamita, or the good friend. Other questions? Okay, Damon.
With regard to the previous question about this bad people, I also am asking for some clarification, because this good spiritual friend, actually, in my experience, it has been kind of hard to find. And so that's why I kind of gravitate towards monastics, because I feel amongst the laity, all the qualities that you just mentioned seem kind of, I mean, I wouldn't trust myself, to have all those qualities. So do you think that, that maybe it's best to find a monastic who you can, start to call a teacher?
Certainly finding a wise person is a wonderful thing if you can find one. And if you can't find a wise person, the Buddha said, go like a rhinoceros and live alone. There is another possibility, a sort of a middle way, and that is to look at the good qualities. A person might be a sort of a mixed bag. They're partly good and partly not so good. So respect and follow that in them which is good. Don't respect and don't follow that in them which is bad. Or if people are full of imperfections and they repeatedly make mistakes, if they have a certain kind of a humility or ability of acknowledging their mistakes, you can learn by a negative example from somebody. So don't do what I did. That actually could be a way that you can be friends of somebody who is at least not a perfect person, a person who's a mixed bag. I often feel that the most difficult and horrible possible situation is when someone is dependent on a bad person. So if you had children in school, and if the teacher is evil or cruel, a bad person as a teacher, what a danger it is for those children. Or if you had a child and the parents are bad people, what a danger it is for that little kid to have to grow up with bad parents. And, you just hope that there's going to be some relative or somebody that they could encounter who would give them a contrary example. Or working in a job, if your boss is evil, if your boss is a bad, dishonest person who's maybe asking you to do dishonest things. So very precious, at least to counterbalance those associations, with associating and finding people who are good.
Thank you.
Yeah, but even your own self, if you see your own imperfections, don't think that you're a bad person and you can never help someone. And because of your sincerity and your good, positive intentions, that in you, which is good, can be a help for somebody else who's looking for the good.
Okay.
Ananea.
Along this line, the value of Kalyanamita cannot be overstated. I mean, that is the most precious gift and part of being associated with a practitioner of the Dhamma, and it's just a marvelous thing. And I personally, along these lines of we're not necessarily with our Kalyanamitas every day. You know, that isn't something maybe in our day-to-day experience we're having the benefit of the friend in that capacity. But what I found is I have friends who I've known for 40, 50 years at this point. And they're good people, they're ethical people. Some of them do have a defined spiritual path that they follow. But what I've done over the years is that I just don't do certain things with them anymore because they don't fit for my practice and where I am now. But I do have areas where I can interact with them, and it's a very positive thing. So I've just learned to, like if they're the thing with dinner and a movie, I don't do that anymore. If there's going to be a dinner and they're going to have wine, I don't do that either. But I do meet them for lunch. I take walks. I do all kinds of other things with them because they do have an innate a goodness, and I value their friendship. And they do have insight in lots of areas that are helpful to me. But I just don't engage any longer in activities that I don't feel are helpful to me. In my current practice and where I choose to place my attention.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. I want to, I've been trying to think of things that are actually not so much completely focused on the dangers and risks, and but also showing the positive path, the upward trend. And what I'm going to do is jump down to the very end of this sutta. It's the same metaphor about the rain falling on the mountain and flowing down and eventually filling up the ocean. This, to me, is a wonderful metaphor for actually for faith, because it's a kind of law that it flows downhill, it doesn't flow uphill. And it's just the course of nature. We can see that, especially if we're out in the forest during the rainy season, and we see how the rain is and how it accumulates and how the water just does what it does. It's unstoppable. It's very difficult to make water change its course even a little bit. So the water is following its own law, and it's a law, like a law of nature. And just similar to that, the Buddha is saying that placing the good factors into place is a law, which inevitably leads to the good result, which in this sutta is culminating in knowledge and freedom. So the sutta goes up and down several different times, but I'm going to go to the very last paragraph and look at these same factors and how it could happen on this upward trajectory. So when the factor of associating with good people is fulfilled, it fulfills the factor of listening to the true teaching. So this again is a slightly different I won't say it's that different, but in those some in the West were trained as Protestant culture, to depend on the good book, the Bible, thinking that each person individually can read their own Bible and make their own discovery and have their own connection with the divine. And in that Protestant Revolution, and this is in our culture, in Western culture, they discarded the dependency on the priesthood and the hierarchy of those who claimed to have a genesis and a tradition going all the way back down to Jesus. And so they rejected all that. They said those the class of the priesthood has become corrupted, and they're not helping us. They're taking us the wrong way instead of the right way. I'm just going to not look for any intermediary to help me. I'm just going to pick up my own Bible and read it. And just the same way, when some Westerners first encountered the Dhamma, and they got a hold of some of the books, like the Dhammapada, or some of the suttas that were translated into Western languages, and people were so deeply impressed by the content and the impact of those texts. But they didn't respect the bhikkhus that they met in Sri Lanka and in the Asian countries. This is by bringing an attitude. So they didn't have enough appreciation for the living tradition which had been handed down, and for the actual lived experience of renunciation, higher morality, and practice, which has been handed down. But nowadays we have come to a better balanced perspective, and we realize the value of both. Obviously, we don't hope to find monastics or religious professionals who are corrupted. We want them to be embodying and living up to the teachings that are handed down and what's represented nowadays in the text that we have available. We understand that those monastics were very concerned about understanding what the Buddha was teaching and what he meant. And they heard the Buddha's warning not to misunderstand and misrepresent the Dhamma. There's like the one thing that the Buddha said the most strongly towards the monastics: don't misrepresent the Dhamma. Don't just jump to a conclusion because it's how you feel and change the Dhamma, but instead to respect and try to carry it out. And then so to really get a hold of it, it's not enough to read the book. It's good to meet somebody who is embodying the practice, and to hear the good Dhamma from the good person. And those two things together can fulfill this factor of what's called faith or confidence. And that faith is not a blind faith, or something that's only religious, or something that's the opposite to wisdom, or something that's only for babies, that when you grow up you won't need faith anymore. Rather, when we think of faith, we could think how if anybody ever had the experience of not being familiar with the teachings of the Buddha, and then at some point they had that encounter and they had this great realization, oh, this is what I've been looking for. And then their enthusiasm and their energy comes up, and their desire to investigate it and pursue it comes along. So it's something which is active, intelligent, engaged, Bhante Dharmavijaya is refers to what he calls kusala chanda, which is a skillful resolve. So the little weak faith, there's a weak little faith you could have when you went to a talk and the speaker was very charismatic and he made it sound so great and everybody else was all happy, and then you start to feel all happy and you say, oh, this is great, now I'm going to be a Buddhist. But then as soon as you go out the door, then you sort of like forget about it because it's not well established. But that little faith that can be resolved and become an aditan, can become like a living practice where you're got that volition, and then from that comes the sati sampajanya, the mindfulness and clear comprehension. So then everything that you experience when you get up, go out, this happens, that happens, you drive in traffic, you meet people, you do your chores, you encounter your problems, you have your emotions, and then it all has got like a different meaning in the context of this Sat Dhamma, which you have heard. You have heard a true Dhamma, which gives a completely different context, how to understand it. And then you wish to investigate and query your experiences. Then with that comes sense restraint, are the kinds of good conduct. And then from that, the 4 kinds of mindfulness meditation. So that will be the kaya anupassana, being mindfully aware of the body. Looking into the origin. So like trying to see the very beginning of each breath, trying to see the very ending of each breath, trying to see all the bodily factors with their very beginning and very ending. With the Vedana, it's coming from the purely physical over to the mental. The Vedana is kind of, in some ways, it's a meeting ground of the mental and the physical, to the extent that some feeling is arising from the body. And so when you have that experience, oh, this is unpleasant, even just training the mind to recognize that, just simple, what's happening now? What is it? What is this really? And then when you can recognize the actuality of what's happening, then seeing, track it back, go back to the yoniso, go back to the moment that it arose, and the moment it disappears. And then with the state of mind, same thing. All of the 5 aggregates, the factors of mentality, being able to see them all very clearly, just like they are, seeing how each phenomenon, each experience is arising and disappearing, watching that. And then from that, the Dhammas, these teachings, these lessons, these facts that have been pointed out, like dependent arising, like dukkha and the cause of dukkha and the cessation of dukkha, like the impermanence, like the absence of a pure eternal self. All of those things can be queried and discovered within one's own direct experience in meditation. And then from that is arising the 7 awakening factors, which we have been discussing for the past week or so, since last Sunday. And then when the 7 awakening factors are fulfilled, they fulfill knowledge and freedom. So this is There's several different patterns we see. This proximate cause pattern, which is the gradual training or the upward path, culminating in our liberation. So now I invite questions or comments about how these factors could be provide the condition for the next ones to arise. I'm going to give a couple of comments that came in on the chat. When children are raised with unclear parameters of truth, yes, it's very difficult. And we hope that a person who had that misfortune during their childish years might have a chance later in life to encounter something different and then to undo and the impact of that. Here's a comment about basic human goodness, being born with goodness. Yeah, so what is the goodness that we all have? How about this one? All beings have the desire for happiness. That's given in the sutras. I think it's in the Dhammapada. Seeing this with the eye of wisdom, one would not wish to do harm to anyone. But have that desire for happiness is actually like, as a teacher, if I'm talking to somebody who's a really corrupted individual, someone who's, like a mentally ill or very settled in a criminal style or something like that, if you can find in them, get through to their desire for happiness, then you have a chance. It's possible that you could point out, well, this way is has more potential to lead to a better and more stable and safer kind of happiness than living some different kind of a life that's without those values. Comments, questions?
Yes, I have one, please.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I didn't see it. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, the last paragraph that you were just going over, it certainly sounds very neat and tidy. Once you've got that good teacher, everything else seems to flow. Let's say it's all going along very nicely. You've got the 7 awakening factors. Now, in my experience, what I have found that you then are circling back periodically, let's say with your teacher who is a monastic. Now, if you're living in the monastery, you're a seminary, or you're under the watchful eye of this, the senior monk, they can keep an eye on you. But if they're out there in the world, if I'm out there in the world, how can I make sure that I'm not sabotaging myself and I'm being opaque with my teacher, and they keep thinking, oh, he's doing great, because, it's very easy for me, in my experience, to kind of evade and trick the teacher into thinking that I'm doing great. I don't even know that I'm tricking them. It's a horrible samsaric tendency. You follow me?
Yes, I do. Well, within the monastic community, we have some very specific traditions for social harmony, to maintain harmony and to settle disputes that could happen within the monastic community. And part of our pattern is something that really encourages this kind of honesty. Namely, if a monastic breaks one of the rules, even a minor rule, it's not that someone else is going to catch them and force them to make up for it, but rather that they would recognize, because of their training, that having broken this rule, they become alienated from the community to that extent. And then if they take their misconduct and sweep it under the rug and hide it, that makes the alienation become even more deeper, so that it creates a real separation from the community. So then the incentive is to go with the procedure that we have and acknowledge the mistake that we made. And then when we make a mistake, we don't get like paraded around in a dunce cap and beaten up or forced to skip all our meals or punished in some kind of harsh way. Nothing like that. Instead, it's a very simple and kind kind of a process that's designed for reconciliation and harmony. So it's the same thing like when you were in a family. If you make a mistake, and if you acknowledge your mistake, and then your parent or your partner is going to be wagging the finger and scolding and punishing, beating, then it's like you don't want to acknowledge your mistakes, do you? And so that's how things get hidden under the rug, and we don't have a chance to grow. But if your partner or your parent or the person in your family would say, "Oh, thank you for telling me that. Let's try not to do that again." And then it becomes easy and like encouraged to be honest, so that then like the children could not be scared to talk to their parents. Or at work, an employee is not scared to talk to the other employees with their mistakes. They're not trying to always hide everything. So my suggestion is, if you're not in a monastery, try to make your family or your group of your friends, try to make it something that actually has got that quality of honesty. And it might be that you don't want to admit your mistake to the monastic, but you could admit to your friend if you have some friends. So try to find a community where you can admit your mistakes and really just be honest. It's very healing. So thank you for that. It's a good question. Now I'm going to ask for Ruwanti, followed by Patipada.
Yeah. I was gone for some time, and it's good to be back with the community. So I have a comment. In Avijja Sutta, it seems like the beginning factor, associating with good friends, leads towards the path of freedom, and associating bad friends lead you away from the path. And what came to my mind is the Mangala Sutta, the discourse on highest blessings. And Buddha started with not to associate with bad people and associating with good friends. He lists them as the foremost ones. That's how he begins the sutta. So it kind of sheds some light on why Buddha stated them as highest blessings. So just wanted to make that connection.
Yeah. In the sutta, it's asevanacha balanam. So the bala is like a fool or a childish person, a foolish person. And in this sutta, they're using the phrase satpurisa for a true person and asatpurisa for an untrue person. But it has the same meaning in both cases. And this sutta really does explain that verse in the Mangala Sutta.
Thank you.
Patipada?
Thank you, Ayya. The gentleman who spoke about not being aware of maybe not being totally honest with oneself is something that I had to shift my perspective, because my judgment on myself was all about the approval of others. And so changing my words to think that I can say things in a certain way so someone else wouldn't view me in a negative light. And as I continued, I had to drop that and try to be able to share the truth in a way where I was totally honest, but also not saying it in a way that would hurt someone else. And that was the tough part to learn to do. And I'm always learning to do that. It's the don't hurt self or other. And so with the communication of the deception, self-deception, it is so critical to never, ever actually curtail that in any way, because the truth to the self is so critical. And so once I was able to face things as they were and to see, yes, you really screwed up here. And not only did you hurt you hurt that, but see it, face it, accept it, and then give myself some metta from acknowledging it.
Mhm.
And then do everything possible to not repeat. And it isn't that you're not going to repeat, it's just that it takes repetition to create a new habit. But the honesty to the self, what I wanted to say to that person is the honesty to yourself, you know when you're lying to yourself. And if you do that reflection in meditation, you know exactly when it happened and when you chose to do it. But it requires a level of awareness, internal awareness, to really face the truth of the self. And it's an ongoing practice. So I just wanted to share my experience with that person.
Thank you. I realize that in explaining the sutta, for some reason, a lot of, I could say, metaphors at the level of society were coming to mind for me. But this also is very much about the internal practice, and in particular about the way that we can be on our journey of self-discovery through meditation, and then having the kind of a lifestyle where having that mindful awareness throughout the day, really trying to see the things that happen to us all throughout the day in a more balanced, realistic, and truthful way. So, what's really happening here? What's it like when I'm having my own responses? What's really happening? So if I see myself, just example, getting very defensive, which could be because of being frightened, that I have to, it has to sometimes come off in layers, like peeling an onion, to come to the more subtle things that are hidden even from ourselves. But as a result of meditation, we can have a chance to be more self-aware, both on the cushion and also throughout the day. And that self-awareness leads to pruning or mowing the grass, or getting the negative or harmful tendencies down to a level that's creating some kind of a space, like it's like an opening. So, oh, now I can see. I'm not just battling with, one crisis after another. Instead, it's able to be calm, and now in the space of calmness to take a look and see. And so I think that may be enough. Okay, Richard.
Thank you, Ayya. The beginning of the sutra is very interesting because Buddha points out that there is no first point of ignorance. This word avijja, can be seen or found, but then the translation I don't think gets the complete flavor when it says still ignorance is seen to have, like Bhikkhu Bodhi's translate, a specific condition. That Pali word can also mean support. In other words, even though you can't find a starting point for it, there's something that's supporting it to continue on. And that's why I like the translation of avijja being incomplete knowledge and vijja being complete knowledge. Because when you have complete knowledge, that banishes, right, incomplete knowledge. It's like the Buddha giving the example, it's like bringing a torch into a dark area so that those with eyes can see, right? Because before it's dark, you can't see anything. But when the torch is there, then it lights up the area and you can see what's going on. So one time I was in a class, and a Buddhist class, and I quoted something from the Buddha where Ananda asked him, what is causing, I don't remember all the details, but paraphrases like, what is causing people to like act badly and things like that the way they do. And Buddha said that, it is only due to this avijja, this incomplete knowledge.
Yeah. That's kind of like Jesus, eh?
I used the term at the time, ignorance, because that was before I did research on it and got what I consider to be a clearer explanation. And when I used that word ignorance, two people in the class became very upset. And they took it in the sense that I was saying that, oh, these ignorant people, like sort of an insult. But I was saying that, don't worry about anything. It's just the natural course of events, right? So just keep yourself calm and go on with your life. You know what I mean? But they took it in this totally strange way. And I remember sitting there thinking how, I wonder why, and then I had to do a lot of contemplation on this term. And that's what led me into studying the Pali of this term and to try to figure out, is this really, it's like you said earlier in the class, you talked about, you translated a certain Pali term, and you said a childish understanding or wisdom or something, right? Mm-hmm. But a lot of times that gets distracted as a fool. So here's Buddha who gives a injunction saying you're not supposed to say things to divide these from those, but publicly he's calling, oh, this fool over here or that fool over there, right? Mm-hmm. But I think what he's really saying is that it's more like a simple child that hasn't really, gotten enough knowledge yet. Just given the chance, though, and growing up, they will get it. You know what I mean? it's not such a divided type of saying. And so I think in translating some things, I think sometimes the translator should try to be a little bit more careful and see how these particular terms might play on the minds of the audience, how a certain term taken in the wrong way could like really turn people off, you might say, and so it's like what Buddha, he was asked about why do some bhikkhus not get treated too harshly or something like that, when they break a rule, and Buddha said, well, they're young, tender shoots, right? You know what I mean? So you have to be careful with them, right? They're new bhikkhus, they don't understand it. So it's sort of like what you were saying about how you should treat each other nicely, in the monastic, setting, right? And so because these are public forums and anybody can find out about it and log in, and you don't know what a person's background is and how they might, react to certain types of terms and things like that. But getting back to this, though, I had mentioned this in another class, where Buddha says there's no first point of this incomplete knowledge. So it's like when a child is born, right? There's no first point of their incomplete knowledge. They just don't have any knowledge. You know what I mean? They barely, we know from modern science now that they can't really even see. Their eyes have to develop eyesight, and to see objects, and their hearing isn't developed, and they're slowly developing themselves even to use their senses to try to get some information about the world. And it also points out to, that in the same way, no first point points out, why Buddha says he's not a nihilist, right? Because only temporary things, things that come in due to causation, they rise and they fall, right? But a thing that's not subject to causation, right? Which ignorance, it says, there's no first cause here. That's what he's saying. Is not subject to rising and falling, but ignorance is a little different from other things. It's a lack of something, right? It's a lack of information. So if one is caught in this, incomplete knowledge, it means they can have wrong knowledge about something. They can have partially wrong knowledge about something, right? But when you get the truth of something, when you get the complete truth of something, right? It's not partial one way or the other, right? It just becomes complete. And that's why attaining it, one knows, oh, now I see the truth. Now I see causation. Now I see the temporary nature of things, right? Of objects and those type of things. And why that temporary nature, leads to dukkha, etc. Because there's no permanency there. Because one of the attributes of atta in the original Vedic teaching is that it's a permanent self, right? Atta means a permanent self. So you're saying, oh, there's no permanence there. So how do I find a self there, right? That's why Buddha always asks, is the I permanent or impermanent? Impermanent, sir. He goes on with this pattern. Anyways, I don't want to talk too much, but since no one else was saying anything, I just thought I'd throw a little something in. Anyway, thank you for listening.
I just want to clarify about this idea of ignorance or avijja, not knowing, has no first point, but it doesn't mean that ignorance is unconditioned. The continuation of ignorance depends on the continuation of the supporting factors, which are described in the sutta. And with the end of the factors that are perpetuating ignorance, and with the arising of the conditions that perpetuate awakening, ignorance does come to an end. Whether ignorance is merely the lack of knowledge, or whether ignorance is like a sort of a blanket, like a positive thing that's covering up true knowledge, is also kind of an interesting question. Certainly, it's possible to quote, know something, or you think you know something, but the thing that you think you know is not really true. And that's like the most, one of the most beneficial qualities in a scientist is to know what you don't know. Because if you know you don't know it, then you can investigate. But if you jump to a conclusion and you think you know the answer, that is blocking your mind from being curious and trying to find out. The vipalasas are the distortions of the confusions that you think that which is ugly you think is beautiful, that which is beautiful you think it's ugly, and so forth like that. Those kinds of knowing things that are not true is kind of like a blanket or a storm cloud or something, which is covering the truth. And then when the blanket is pulled aside, the truth can be revealed. Buddha was often very careful in his language because he didn't want us to become materialistic, to thinking we can pile up some kind of Dhamma wealth that would be like positive things. And if we pile up enough goodness or pile up enough things that we know, that we can get a ladder or something and climb up to enlightenment like that. It's not that like enlightenment is based on what we let go of, not what we've accumulated. And one who's really wise, he's heard much, but he's not accumulated. And so this idea of letting go of ignorance is a very very interesting. This may be enough for now, but please remember these starting factors: the associating with true friends, listening to the true Dhamma, rising of faith, cleaning up the hindrances and the bad acts, and that these purifications are really setting the ground for the arising of the factors of awakening, and the factors of awakening are setting the ground for awakening, which is the end to which we aspire. Now let us turn to the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha and offer closing respect. Araham Samma Sambuddha Bhagava Buddham Bhagavantam Abhivademi. Suakato Bhagavata Dhammam Namasami. Supatipanno Bhagavato Savakasano
Sangham Namam.
Thank you, Ayya.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Ayya.
Thank you, Ayya.
Thank you so much.